Awesome. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Solving Sustainability. This episode we'll be talking about exploring environmental justice. We'll start with a quick 45-minute panel discussion, just exploring the topic. We'll have 10 minutes of formal Q&A if anyone wants to come up and ask a question. We'll have a 10-minute break and a call to action where you can complete a small action to help solve sustainability. And then lastly, we'll have green gossip where you can talk with each other and reflect on what you've just learned. So, to start us off, Sanika and I are going to give you a quick crash course on what environmental justice means. Environmental justice refers to the fair treatment and authentic involvement of all communities, regardless of income, race, or gender, in the formation, implementation, and enforcement of environmental policies.
Environmental justice can be broken down into 17 principles as first outlined by the First National People of Color Leadership Summit in 1991. The first principle, distributive justice, revolves around the distribution of environmental benefits or burdens in our communities. An example of environmental benefits is access to clean water or renewable energy, while the distribution of burdens could look like hazardous waste sites and fossil fuel plants surrounding marginalized communities.
The second type, procedural justice, asks that communities impacted are involved in the policymaking process for environmental regulation. For example, if a new data center was expected to pollute the local area and was going to be built next to a specific city, then the principle of procedural justice upholds that the city's local government and inhabitants would need to be able to have a say in whether or not the data center could be placed there.
Next up is recognitional justice, which acknowledges the context of an area or population and their relationship to power. The principle urges us to elevate historically marginalized groups to protect their agency and voices in environmental issues. This includes validating different systems of knowledge in the decision-making space and redistributing the power to speak and act to those closest to an environmental issue.
And the final type that we're going to talk about today is restorative justice, which highlights the importance of remediation and restoration for the communities that historically have been the most impacted by environmental harms.
Right. Altogether, these principles born from the civil rights movement and a growing understanding of the unequal distribution of environmental harm seek to effectively recognize and address environmental injustices, especially those present in low-income, African American, and Native communities across the U.S.
Right. The environmental justice movement exists as a public health and community elevation framework, seeking to protect and restore health and decision-making power for all communities.
Now that we've got this very quick and simplified rundown of what environmental justice looks like, we are going to ask our experts and dive deeper. So our first question to Dr. Cutts, and then we'll move down. What does environmental justice work look like for you, and how did you get involved in it?
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to Karavi and Sanika for organizing. I've given a lot of thought to this, and a little bit about me. I'm speaking as a person after work, not a professor. I grew up in Vermont, and so when you think about Vermont, you think of trees and forest and hippies, probably maybe some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. That wasn't really the vibe where I lived. I was surrounded by trees, sure, and I thought conservation was the way to go for me. And then I started to learn, that the forests of Vermont, the whole state, in fact, that one year we were a country, was clear-cut, and that the forests I loved and thought were much better than the forests in New Hampshire were mostly second growth. And that was really disruptive to my sense of self. As I learned about that, I also started to learn that the school grounds, the play yards, and the ball fields for the elementary school and high school were built on a former creosote site where a labor prison had dipped telephone and electrical poles in a natural but toxic substance, and that was polluting and continued to pollute the streams that were really important to my childhood identity in those formative moments. And then I started I went to college, and I learned through books about the environmental justice movement, the anti-toxic movement, and labor rights. And the first thing that really stuck out to me was how much data was being ignored. That, Lois Gibbs in Love Canal was telling the EPA that the children and women of their community were sick and that they were getting burns from being in their neighborhood and they were getting dismissed as hysterical housewives. That insurance companies and the government were trying to make estimates on people's lives and they were using their earned wages, which meant those children and stay-at-home parents' lives were worth virtually nothing. I was learning about GIS as a way to make sense of disparate patterns and learning about the ways the environmental justice advocates were noticing all of these different seemingly local differences in how people were being treated and whether they were able to resist toxic sites in their neighborhoods or being convinced that there was no other option if economic employment and mobility was necessary. They would have to accept particular risks. And finding that, such power in how they were able to document these patterns across space in different ways, and really looking for a way to use what I knew I had as a personal strength, nerd brain, together with an opportunity to think about how do we treat the people on Earth with dignity. And so environmental justice as a framework for both critical thinking and critical change made a lot of sense to me. And over time, I've continued to kind of think about how to use my nerd brain as an educator, as a community member here at NC State, in my professional life, and in Raleigh in my personal life, to be civically engaged as a person and to do research that questions the assumptions of science and who science is for in my professional life. And being able to work alongside and learn from people like Jen and Chelsea and their organizations and students like you two has just, makes it easy to keep going when things get rocky on the outside, because it's a journey, and it's important to me personally, as well as professionally.
So I think there are some parallels in my story in the sense that I grew up on the Jersey Shore, and my first exposure, no pun intended, to pollution was that there were garbage barges that would go 6 miles out and they would dump trash, and then the trash would make its way back, and there were needles and all kinds of lots of red fish that people joke about New Jersey about that are, washing up in various places. And so that sort of sparked my interest in the environment when I was in high school. And so I started learning more and becoming a little more involved in civic organizations. But I think at the time, I saw it more in the kind of green sustainability type of realm rather than really thinking about justice-related issues. And that came a little bit more in college. I went to college in upstate New York, and when I was there, I learned about a county health building where people were starting to get sick. And most of the county health workers were on a fairly low income and they felt that they had what's considered sick building syndrome when you're exposed to multiple chemicals in a confined space of an office, or sometimes it might happen in like a trailer park or things like that, or trailer building, where there are a lot of chemicals from manufactured carpeting, furniture, etc. And so I got to know a couple of the women who were impacted by that, and that was really, I think, what opened my eyes more to the idea that there are socioeconomic disparities that are often coupled with environmental harms. And so that was something that I learned about a little bit more in college. And I think my interests sort of evolved over time. I knew from learning about that I was more and more interested in air pollutants and how people are exposed. So that kind of inspired me to go on and get a master's degree and a PhD, which were actually focused more on fluid dynamics, so like the way that pollutants move. But I really felt like that wasn't going to feel satisfactory to pursue in my career. At the same time, I think as I learn more and more about environmental justice, I realize that I am not the best communicator of these issues. I can fill a very defined role. And so that role is really to try to use what I've learned about the way that pollution forms and evolves in space and time, and can be measured the way it can be measured, to try to support community members who are the best advocates for themselves. And so when I ended my PhD, a couple of years later, I was teaching at City University of New York and working with a not-for-profit organization through some research. And we were working mostly with New York City public schools in areas with high asthma rates. And so a lot of what we were doing there was measuring things like idling automobiles, idling school buses, and then working with the organization who could take that information and act as advocates for the school to try to reduce absenteeism due to air pollutant triggers. And then I worked at the EPA for several years, more due to life events than anything. But I still had this lingering interest and had the opportunity while I was there for, I worked there for 11 years and had some great recent graduates who worked with me who also shared this type of interest. And so we would mostly work on data analyses, sort of the type that Bethany mentioned, that are more spatially oriented, and we're able to document some disparities. And so that's become part of my sort of research background. And then when I came here to NC State, around the time that I moved back from EPA to academics, I had an opportunity to work with the Louisiana State University Superfund Research Program because they needed some help with exposure assessment. And so I started working more with a community in Louisiana that was looking for help with measuring pollutants and characterizing them. And so we were able to form a nice partnership, and then I've built similar work since then.
Hi, thanks for having me. I am not a member of faculty. I am a student, PhD student here, and my maybe this is encouragement to you guys to keep doing what you're doing, but my involvement with environmental justice came because I took a class. It was an environmental history class. I'm a humanist. My research was not necessarily related to the environment at all, but I'm a labor historian, and so there is a connection there. But I was taking an environmental history class in the spring semester of 2024, and we were learning about Warren County, which is often referred to as the birth of the environment, the place that birthed the environmental justice movement, which is just Warren County, North Carolina, 70 miles towards Virginia, towards the coast from here. And so I guess I'll do a little background on Warren County. So the way Warren County birthed the environmental justice movement is because they got dumped on by PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, multiple times. So first a contractor, Raleigh-based contractor, illegally took truckfuls of PCB materials and dumped them all over the roadways throughout Warren County. And then we're made to clean that up, and you have to do something with the PCBs so they don't then leach into the groundwater and poison everyone more than they already have. And so the then Governor Jim Hunt, North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, looked around and was like, what would a great place be for this PCB landfill? Oh, Warren County. And wanted to site this, likely unsafe PCB landfill in Warren County in 1982. And by that point, the federal government had declared this a toxic chemical banned production. Like, we knew that this was a toxic chemical. And so I'm reading in class about this history, and the people in Warren County who organized 6 weeks of protests to protest the siting of the landfill in Warren County, drawing attention to the health problems, how close it was to, churches, schools, houses in their community, literally like laying down their bodies in the street to stop landfill trucks from coming in. And not only that, I've had the pleasure of talking to some of the Warren County organizers, and anytime you get a chance to go hear Dolly Burwell talk, you should go hear Dolly Burwell talk. She's incredible. Her children and other children were also out in the streets. They got arrested by police officers. They spoke about how afraid they were to grow up and get cancer because this landfill was going to be in their community. And so I'm sitting there, reading this story of Warren County, and me and my classmates look, and we're in that mega building on Hillsborough that's like Thompson, Caldwell, I forget the other one, that's all connected together. And we just kind of like look across the Court of Carolina and we're like, Poe Hall, isn't that what was in Poe Hall? Wasn't that PCBs? And this is about 3 months after Poe Hall had closed. And then we started to just sort of say, did the university ever really say anything about what the health effects are of PCBs? Because we've just read in a very visceral way how people did not want this in their community, and kind of recognized that we'd seen news stories about people connecting their breast cancer, autoimmune diseases to the time that they'd spent in Poe Hall, which had, above EPA limits of PCBs. But the university had talked about the PCB levels, but not like, what does that mean for people, right? Because in my view and the view of others, I think that work in environmental justice, it's about people. And so we decided to form an organization called Campus Community Alliance for Environmental Justice, and just find out more about kind of an unfolding situation and see if we could figure out were there factors that were going to impact certain people more than others. And so CCAJ, it's when you start an organization, make it a shorter name, y'all. That's my first recommendation. You don't think about how often you're then going to say it. Okay, so aside from that, I think starting an organization from an EJ framework has guided what we've done, right? So we're looking at these other movements that have happened. We're looking at what happened in Warren County and recognizing that our work can both build on that and also give back to that movement. And so it allows us to ask very specific questions like, what happened in Poe Hall? What is, wow, there's a lot of people who are training to be teachers and social workers that are in Poe Hall. And oh wow, that also happens to be a lot of women who are in those fields. And oh wow, there's a lot of breast cancer. But it also allows us to look around and think about like, okay, well, PCBs certainly aren't just in Poe Hall. They were very commonly used in building materials, especially from 1950 to 1979. There's about 35 other buildings on this campus that are built in that time frame. And what can we sort of look at Poe Hall as this canary in a coal mine to make sure that there's not other problems that we have on our campus. So that's kind of where we are. It's still an unfolding situation at this time. Poe Hall is closed, but I don't think that's the end of the story on this campus or other campuses. If you've followed other university news, just down the road at NC Central University, their student body has been protesting the conditions of their dorms. They have toxic black mold in their dorms, and so we're trying to make the connection about what are some lessons we can learn about sort of organizing on this campus that other people can sort of use.
Really amazing to hear about all of your stories and see a through line in the way that all of your places that you're from or places that you've lived a long time are really connected to these environmental justice issues. So thank you all for telling us a little bit about how you got here. Well, when we examine how issues affect communities, we often use the social determinants of health as a framework, looking at factors like community cohesion, environmental conditions, access to healthy food and recreational spaces, and other key elements that shape well-being to understand an issue's range of impact. This is for Chelsea and Dr. Cutts, and whichever of you prefers can start, but how does environmental justice, or lack thereof, intersect with and influence these social determinants of health?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things I referenced earlier, just about who is sort of in, how your like work, or I guess, your work might, and I think about work a lot because I'm a labor historian, I'm a labor organizer as well, and so I think about, sometimes at a university, you could be in like a nebulous place. You're like, I love my research. I have a great job. Or, it's just very cool to be on a university campus. And you can love all that and still want to be like safe in your environment. And so I think that, asking the questions about sort of which building or how resources are allocated across a big university like this one. There's lots of different colleges that have different funding structures. So thinking about that, but also not just students and faculty on this campus. I think if we went out and did a survey of who spends the most time in buildings, we might find that a lot of housekeeping staff are in these buildings the most. And so I guess I have concerns about like what that means in terms of like the power structure of the university, and if these people are sort of being brought into the fold on that conversation. And so I guess I'm advocating for labor organizing as a way to bring people together kind of across colleges, across disciplines, across job types. And I think that's one of the things I was talking about this earlier about like environmental justice work. Since starting CCAJ, I have met so many more people in different colleges than I ever have before. And really one of the, before CCAJ even started, the sort of, at least that I saw on campus, the first people to sort of make a statement about what was going on in Poe Hall were the Campus Workers Union. So I'm a member of the Campus Workers Union, which is the UE Local 1, or the NC State chapter of UE Local 150. And the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, which is not a union, I have to like disclose that, but it's a place that faculty can come together and organize outside of like the formal structures of the university. And so I guess that's maybe me like marketing a solution in a place where you can feel really divided by either your college or whether you're an undergrad or a grad student or a faculty, finding those places where we like come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Cutts, and if you notice your mic getting a little fuzzy, please lean in. We can give him some help on our end.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate everything she said. So a common phrase in environmental justice work is where the environment where we live, work, play. And sometimes people add on pray, eat, other things. So this example of not forgetting that humans move around is really important, right? Like we don't, except for maybe during parts of COVID, sit in our homes the entire time we're alive. And so thinking about social determinants of health is really thinking about that space-time prism, the way people move around in different spaces, and the way their body and the space contribute to their susceptibility to risk and really their opportunity to lead change. Because you have different experiences, you see different things, you know places differently from other people. So one of the big kind of transitions in my approach to doing education and research related to environmental justice is really thinking about how we move the students in class into different spaces so that we're doing and learning with and not to or on people, whether it be elementary school partners or communities experiencing disaster or other complex environmental hazards, to really to go in with a process that centers dignity and leadership on the part of the community as well as their interests. So the most powerful way that's manifested is being able to create short documentary films where community members do the filming as paid research assistants. We construct the narrative together and then put it out in a way that makes sense to them. So I learned about this from a colleague when I worked at University of Illinois in urban planning, and he learned about it from people who were then graduate students at UNC, who I've then come to know and love through an environmental justice context. But it's awesome from a number of different perspectives. We did it in Milwaukee when I was in Illinois around areas of concern and stream cleanup. We've done it in Robeson County and in a way that continues to be used as more disasters come up, so that when people come into communities, they remember themselves and that they also have a body that's coming into spaces and making a difference, both positive and negative in different ways. So that mostly, social determinants of health is not just where you lay your head down at night, it's where you live, work, play, pray, etc. And environmental justice is about not being defined by existing conditions, but really finding ways to change and improve those for your communities, but doing so in a way that benefits all communities overall.
Absolutely, and very key to be highlighting the communities impacted most and making sure it's their voices that are elevated in any sort of environmental justice work.
Literally passing the mic.
There you go, exactly. Well, awesome. I guess my next question for you all, especially for Dr. Richmond-Bryant here, is what effective strategies have you seen for translating the principles of environmental justice into meaningful inclusion and tangible change? And loved hearing your example of that too, Dr. Katz. How are they being exemplified or not exemplified today?
That's a great question. I think, so what effective strategies have I seen for translating principles into meaningful inclusion? I think a really good example of that was something that the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network organized this summer, and they organized for North Carolina, but just to give you all a little bit of context, in let's say between 2021 and the very beginning of 2025, there was this federal White House empowered advisory council that was made up primarily from people who were in the movement. There were some academics that were on this advisory council, but it was mostly people from community-based organizations across the country. And they were providing advice to the White House at a very high level. It really spoke to the level of priority that was placed on environmental justice issues. And so that was disbanded around the middle of January of this year. I think around the 20th of January this year. And so after that, they decided to regroup as the People's Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and are on a ideally 50-state tour to try to talk with individuals across the country. And North Carolina, being the birthplace of environmental justice, with the Warren County example, was selected as the first state where that would be held. And so that was held in Greensboro, I think it was like the 12th and 13th of June. And during that meeting, which was organized by the North Carolina EJ Network, basically individuals from different organizations, from different communities across the state came forward and provided testimony. And that was a way for individuals across the state to give voice to what they were experiencing, and a way for that to be heard from this group of individuals who were already well steeped in the movement, and provides documentation. One thing that we're working on now, I have a couple of students who are working with me through this mechanism that the Center for Geospatial Analytics on campus have put together, where the students are kind of working with me like I'm organizing their pay, but they're really working with somebody from the North Carolina EJ Network to take those testimonies and put together story maps that lay out stories of resilience among those who are dealing with injustices across the state. And that will ideally then be a living resource that other people from other communities can look to if they're looking for information about what communities have done to try to overcome challenges, and use those examples as templates for those communities that are, currently or in the future dealing with issues. So that's one example of something that we've been able to do. And I can't even say all I've literally done is find a couple of students and connect them with the EJ Network so that they can do the work. And kind of in a similar token, I mentioned doing some work in Louisiana, but that work is us taking measurements, summarizing data, putting those data in understandable forms for community members then to take for their advocacy work. And so those are strategies to not to really center ourselves, but to just do what we can do, whether it's using the resources of the university, like putting students to work, or whether it's using the resources that we have to get grants to take measurements with a slate of instruments to try to characterize problems and put that information back in community members' hands. And so that's the idea of that being trying to not be the center, but to try to help communities center their own needs in different ways, tell their own stories in different ways. And let's see, what do we see being left out in the public perception of environmental justice issues? That's a really good question. I think oftentimes...
We can jump to it if you wish.
Okay. And I'll try to finish up my answer quickly. Sorry, I'll ramble on for like hours if you let me. But I think sometimes we think of certain communities of color, certainly lower income communities as dealing with environmental justice issues, and have a tendency to kind of tokenize. And so trying to think of communities not in that sympathetic way, and maybe tokenized, marginalized way, and trying to re-envision communities as being empowered and taking these tools that maybe they don't have on their own. So we collectively, who are kind of working in this support space, can try to put in their hands to provide data, but not to provide the voice. And looking at communities as being places of power, being full of people who are so intelligent and who can navigate all of these complex political and scientific issues to learn about and act on these problems in a way that goes so far beyond what I would ever hope to do. And so I think trying to think about that perception of communities much differently is an important part of that also. Like, just oftentimes people I meet without a college education being able to synthesize all of this information and advocate in the most effective and comprehensive manner, understanding and communicating these issues just amazes me. And I don't think I would be able to do that if I didn't have the education I have. And so really kind of thinking differently about communities that are impacted, I think is one challenge that might be considered.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Richmond-Bryant. Everything you said about involving students too, I thought that was really interesting. We're gonna draw back to that question for Chelsea. What do you see often being left out in the public perception of environmental justice issues?
I guess to reference something that Dr. Bryant said earlier, first off, that we're in a moment where environmental justice is like, that as a buzzword is not allowed anymore. And so and that's interesting for me because I feel like as someone who's coming into this right now, I'm like, wait a second, I just got here. What's going on? But one of the things I got to go, I'm participating in something called the Environmental Justice Leadership Academy, which I recommend to anyone who is interested in it. I'm happy to talk more about that later. I don't know, that's just a random plug I had. But I got to talk with Dolly Burwell at one of these events, and someone sort of asked this question, like, how do you kind of keep going when you're under this current political climate? And she was really forthright. She was like, well, in 1982 when I did it, there was no environmental justice movement. Like, that wasn't a thing. We made it happen. Like, we named environmental racism. We birthed the movement. There's a documentary called We Birthed a Movement that you can go watch about it. And in a way that's kind of comforting that, like, even if, and they are, this administration is literally auditing for the word environmental justice to see if it shows up in grants and curriculums, that there are people that are going to know these principles, that there are going to be stories out there that people can look to for inspiration and for tactics. And so I'm incredibly biased as a historian that we need to know our history, and that these, you don't necessarily have to have an entire class called environmental justice, but that environmental justice should be interwoven into like the teaching of American history, right? Like, all of our lives are better because in Warren County, the environmental justice movement was born. And so just kind of bringing those stories into a variety of different places, I think is sort of what's needed at this particular moment.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up our panel session for today. Super, super excited. Now, thank you so much, all of you, for your really thoughtful responses. I feel like I learned so much more than I even expected just sitting here moderating the panel. So I really appreciate your time and your effort.